one.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the 1907 Renault Vanderbilt. In 1906, Ferenc Szisz won the first Grand Prix of the Auto Club of France, driving a four-cylinder 90 HP Renault. William K. Vanderbilt, he was a pioneer, a racing pioneer. He was so impressed with this vehicle that he decided to persuade the owner or the maker to create a smaller version of it, and that's how the Renault Vanderbilt was created. Much of this early history is a bit unknown. It didn't appear until 1951 when it was anonymously left at the now-defunct Long Island Automotive Museum. Even then, the car sat idle in a back building at the museum for decades. In the 1970s, the museum made a deal with a man named Ledyard Pfund. He was a New Jersey engineer. If Pfund could restore the vehicle, the museum would give him a half interest in it. And Pfund, he basically did that. He documented restoring this vehicle all the way from the 1970s to the 1990s until his death in 1991. After his death, this Renault Vanderbilt went on display at the Collier Automotive Museum, now known as the Res Institute in Florida. In 1994, the Pfund estate gifted this Renault to Alcid Transportation Museum, and after a long period of static display, the Pfund Renault was returned to operational capacity in 2018.
Just to back up just a little bit, I was here when the car got here. It got here basically in pieces. Mr. Pfund had sent the engine and I believe transmission to England to be rebuilt, and they did a pretty good job on it, but he never got it running, and it showed up here, like I say, semi disassembled. Peter Curtis was the automotive guy here at the time, and he and the volunteer crew put it together. Peter and his crew tried to get it running. I remember it being towed around the runway, trying to get it running, and it just didn't want to cooperate. The car is so valuable that collections committee decided to just leave it as a static display until such time that we were really dedicated in getting it running. It's one of the vehicles that came here where the family that donated it has the expectation that we will run it. So it took a long time, but it finally came up on the list that we would get the car running. So with it assembled now, we shipped it down to Steve Litton in Chardon, Ohio, who is the premier Rolls-Royce restoring shop in the country, but he also will do other unusual cars. His regulations for picking up a new customer is he must do work on your Rolls-Royce first, and then he'll consider some other car that you might have. And so to prime him to do this car, we had sent down the, which Rolls-Royce went down? The Longfellow Rolls-Royce went down. So now we had an in at Steve Litton's, and a trustee at the time, Norm Shanklin, took an interest in this car, and between Litton and Shanklin, more history has been uncovered. It would be nice to have Norm up here sometime to give a talk on this car and find out what he uncovered. But for those who don't know, the Austin Clark was the owner of the Long Island Auto Museum. It was one of the first auto museums in the country. That French-style Renault racer. And what Willie K did is he had to move the engine back in the frame, which moved the transmission back, maybe for weight distribution. No way to tell, but you've got all this empty space up here. So I suspect that he had used one of those European racers and said, they got too much weight over the front, let's move the engine back. So that's one of the differences, besides the smaller engine. Unique to Renault is this monstrous radiator that sits behind the engine. I think that was an attempt to have better cooling in the car. I mean, the cool air goes by the engine, cooling it a little bit, and then it runs through the radiator and cools it even more. It's got a standard geared and clutch transmission. It's got that oiler rig like we've seen on a couple of the other cars we did a talk on, where you have the drip oilers, only the tank is part of the oiler here. And it's got those little sight glasses where you can control, excuse me, you can control the amount of oil going to individual spots on the engine. This one is an L head, meaning that underneath these caps are the valves going up and down, and it's a blind bore cylinder, which means it has no demountable cylinder head on it. The head is the same cast the same as the cylinder. These springs and such down here are just pushing the valves up and down. It's got a sort of a horizontally mounted magneto here, which is kind of unusual. Usually they're in line with the camshaft. I like the non-skid tires. We've talked about them a little before. Back in the day, different tire manufacturers would put different logos on their tires for traction. And this one was non-skid. That's what it says. If you look at, it says non-skid, non-skid, non-skid all the way around. Don't think they do very good in the snow. We have the headlights for it somewhere, but this is looking like the Racer. One of the interesting features on the Racers too is this super extra large gas tank. Those are kind of the unique features of the car. So we got the car back from Steve Litton. I got a ride in it down there in Chardon, Ohio. It was kind of interesting. We got it back here, and it was turned over to us to run. Toby over there, he's the guy I called to crank the car. He knows how to run it and drive it. Takes muscle to get this thing cranked up. There's no electric start. It's a huge engine. If you ever looked at a Renault engine of 1907, it's about half the size of this, both height and length. It's this puny little engine. This one is called, maybe Jonah can verify, this one is a 3545 engine. Is that what it said? 3540? Right. And the reason you see a lot of these cars and engines around here called those 2 horsepowers is because one of the numbers is taxable. You would be taxed by the horsepower. So which one do you think they're going to tax? An owner would tax by the high one or the low one? Low one. Okay, so there's your 35, and then if it's a 35/45, the 45 is brake horsepower. That's the one where you're measuring the horsepower off the crankshaft. So, and they kind of even do that today. If you build a car in Japan and you import it to the United States, there are different regulations for horsepower ratings, and America makes you claim closer horsepower ratings if you're from a foreign country. If your engine makes 100 horsepower, you've got to make 100 horsepower plus or minus 5. But if you build an engine in America, you might get 35 horsepower plus or minus slack.
We're warned, theorized, how fast does it go? We've talked about this a lot. I'd love to someday get the sheriff to close off Route 73 where it's closed and stretch, and go down around the gig store, come on the corner, and not really work it, but just let her run. Like every now and then, like an old horse, you got to take him out and trot them. Let her run, and it's going to do 65, 70. I can feel that. The problem with this, and what's different is, these non-skids, if you watch all the old Vanderbilt Cup races, they're all on dirt, okay? The tires are meant to be spinning until you get traction. They spun around corners, they kept them lined up. What's difficult for this, and you have to be very cautious, is driving this on pavement. The clutch is really tight. I mean, it's a race car, it's a performance car, it's snappy. And you're not meant to just like pop it and go, because it needs that little bit of slippage. And it's very, it's low geared early on, so it takes a while to get through progression. So our longest stretch has probably been our access road, which is almost like 3/4 of a mile. Well, it takes us almost all that distance to kind of get up to 25, 30. Once you're in high gear and you're going about 30, it levels out, it smooths out. And one thing that's tricky, we used to drive it sometimes here at our shows for demonstration, and everyone who's been here knows how crowded it is, especially.